Let's be honest, societal rules are made to be broken. Don't believe me? Just think about all those times you snuck out of your house as a teenager or stayed out past curfew. But one man took rule breaking to a whole new level. His name was Max Stirner, and he changed the world by going against society's rules and thinking for himself. So who was this revolutionary thinker, and what can we learn from him? Despite being born into poverty, his brilliance shone through, and he was able to get an education. After studying philosophy at the University of Berlin, he became a lecturer at the university, teaching some of the most brilliant minds in the world. And after that, his mother had to take over the family business and raise Max and his two brothers on her own. He could have let this experience define him and make him bitter, but instead he used it as fuel to make something of himself. He knew that he didn't want to live a life of crime, so he poured all his energy into his education. And it paid off. Stirner was eventually able to get a scholarship to the University of Berlin, where he studied philosophy under some of the most brilliant minds in the world. Growing up, Stirner never really had a sense of belonging. In fact, Stirner's ideas were so radical that he was labeled a dangerous agitator and was even put under surveillance by the government. In simple terms, egoism is the idea that each person should look out for themselves and pursue their own interests above all else. This goes against the traditional view that we should put the needs of others before our own, and that we should conform to the expectations of society. You're sacrificing your own happiness and well-being for the sake of others. And that, according to Stirner, is the recipe for misery and unhappiness. On the other hand, when you follow your own unique path and pursue your own interests, you're free to be yourself and live life on your own terms. And that, according to Stirner, is the key to true happiness and fulfillment. But Stirner argued that this is a recipe for disaster and that it leads to nothing but misery and unhappiness. All Stirner is advocating for is individual freedom and autonomy. You might be laughed at, ridiculed, or even ostracized by society. You need to do what you want to do and say what you want to say, no matter what others think. Sure, it might be scary, but it's worth it. The only way to be truly happy is to be yourself. And that's exactly what Max Stirner did. He was unapologetically himself, and he changed the world for the better because of it. But that shouldn't stop you from being yourself. You have to be true to yourself, no matter what others think. Find your passion and pursue it relentlessly. Don't let anyone hold you back or stop you from achieving your goals. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content. We would really appreciate it. Also, if you have a friend who could use some inspiration, please share this video with them. It could really help them out. Remember, the only way to be truly happy is to be yourself. And who knows, you might just change the world in the process. If you try to conform to society's expectations, you'll just end up miserable and unhappy. He wants us to be able to make our own decisions and live our lives according to our own values and beliefs. You need to do what you want to do and say what you want to say, no matter what others think. His ideas were so radical that they were often misunderstood and misrepresented by his contemporaries. But Stirner didn't care. He knew that he was on to something big, and he was willing to risk it all to share his ideas with the world. Sure, it might be scary, but it's worth it. The only way to be truly happy is to be yourself. That's all any of us really want, isn't it? The freedom to be ourselves without fear of persecution or judgment. He wanted us to be able to make our own decisions and live our lives according to our own values and beliefs without fear of persecution or judgment. But despite the persecution he faced, Stirner didn't back down. He believed that this is the only way to achieve true happiness and fulfillment. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't this just a justification for selfishness and self-centeredness? Well, yes, if you don't take things too far. But Stirner's concept of egoism isn't actually selfish at all. It's just based on the simple idea that you can take care of someone else if you do and take care of yourself first. You can't give from an empty cup, as they say. He knew that he was onto something big, and he was willing to risk it all to share his ideas with the world. When his father died when he was just 2 years old, he was largely left to fend for himself. And even though he was able to get an education and become a successful lecturer, he never really felt like he fit in. That's because Stirner was a true individual, and he didn't conform to the expectations of society. He was never afraid to speak his mind, and he was always willing to go against the grain. As a result, Stirner and his brothers were largely left to fend for themselves. They were forced to make their own clothes and shoes and do their own housework. And because they didn't have much money, they couldn't go to school. Instead, Stirner taught himself how to read and write by using books that his mother, as customers, would leave behind. Even though he didn't have the structure and guidance that most children receive, Stirner didn't let it hold him back. He was determined to make something of himself, and he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve his goals. But despite his success, Stirner was never satisfied with the status quo. He wanted more than just to follow in the footsteps of his predecessors. While studying at the university, he quickly made a name for himself as a controversial thinker. His lectures were packed full of radical ideas that challenged the status quo and made people uncomfortable. But Stirner didn't care. He was passionate about his beliefs, and he wasn't afraid to share them with the world. Instead, he wanted to blaze a new trail and create his own path in life. And that's exactly what he did. In a nutshell, egoism is the idea that each person should look out for themselves and pursue their own interests above all else. This goes against the traditional view that we should put the needs of others before our own, and that we should conform to the expectations of society. Stirner argued that this is a recipe for disaster, and that it leads to nothing but misery and unhappiness. Born in 1806 in a small village in Bavaria, Germany, Max Stirner was a thinker and writer whose ideas would change the world forever. It introduced the concept of egoism, which emphasized individual freedom and self-interest above all else. But despite the persecution he faced, Stirner continued to write and speak out against the status quo. To answer that question, we have to look at Stirner's personal life and how his experiences shaped his worldview. He didn't let anyone silence him or stop him from sharing his ideas with the world. This went against the grain of traditional German philosophy, which had focused on duty, obedience, and conformity. But Stirner wasn't afraid to go against the current. He knew that his ideas were controversial, but he didn't care. He was willing to risk it all for the sake of truth. Stirner's first book, The Ego and Its Own, published in 1844, was a radical departure from the works of his contemporaries. In fact, Stirner's ideas were so controversial that The Ego and Its Own was banned, and he was even put under surveillance by the government. But why did Stirner take such a radical approach to life? What led him to go against the grain and break the rules? Growing up, Stirner had very little direction. His father, who was a shoemaker, died when Max was only 2 years old. For example, when Stirner was 14 years old, he was sent to prison for stealing food to eat. However, Stirner's rebellious streak didn't end there. In fact, it was just the beginning. One of Stirner's most controversial ideas was his concept of egoism. To understand Stirner's concept of egoism, we need to look at his personal life and how his experiences shaped his worldview. This is evident in everything he wrote, from his controversial lectures at the University of Berlin to his banned book, The Ego and Its Own. So what exactly did Stirner mean when he talked about egoism? Instead, Stirner argued that we should follow our own unique path in life and not worry about what other people think. When you follow society's rules and put the needs of others before your own, you're essentially living a life of self-denial. Now, I know this might sound radical, but it's really not. Sadly, we don't live in a perfect world. And if you dare to be different, you will likely face opposition. So if you want to be happy and fulfilled, you need to follow your own path in life. Max Stirner was a truly revolutionary thinker who dared to go against the status quo and challenge the established order. Stirner's concept of egoism has been misinterpreted as being selfish and self-centered, but it's really just a call for individual freedom and autonomy. If you want to be happy and fulfilled, you need to follow your own path in life. So if you're feeling lost or directionless, take a cue from Stirner. Thanks for watching.